All right, so this is our 1979 Ford Bronco project. It's already got a 460 fuel injected motor out of a 1996-ish F350. We're going to be doing a lot of different projects to it over the coming year, probably at least a year. We're going to be doing everything from paint, getting it running, doing interior, but most importantly, first and foremost, is we're going to get it up in the air. So that's what we're going to start with today, is doing the front and rear suspension lift kits. That'll get it up another 4 or 5 inches, and then we're going to run 35s on it. All right, so we're going to start out by pulling the springs off. So you can see shocks are kind of in the way. We'll pull the spring just by letting it sag. We got to pull the tires, let it sag, pull the springs off, and then we've got lift springs for the front here, for the coils at least, 4 inch or so. We'll leave the shocks off. We're going to reposition the shocks, I think. We've actually got extended brake lines already on it. Kind of hard to see back there, but we've already got extended brake lines on it, ready to go. So I'm going to put you guys on time lapse, and you can watch us work a little bit. We'll take a break here in a second once we get the springs off and do the actual suspension arms in the back. All right, so this is where we currently sit. You can see spring pocket and the shock pocket here. Shock was a little bit tough to get off, but not too bad. It's just a 3/4 inch bolt at the bottom and a 9/16 stud on the top, or the nut on it was 9/16. If it's rusted up really bad, you got to grab a hold of it with something. We actually grabbed a hold of the body of the shock with pliers. You might ask yourself if we're going to clean all this stuff up and de-rust it, and the honest answer is right now no. Probably clean up like this bottom spring pocket a little bit, paint it before we put it back on. But the way we got all of this apart was, well, the easiest way was obviously we sagged the suspension as low as it would go, and then there's 2 9/16 headed bolts up here, one here and one right up through the middle with a captured nut on it. Got both of those loose with it supported, with the axle supported, and then we could pull the top of the spring out and then ran a really long extension. I'll show you on the other side what we did. Ran a really long extension down to get this bottom spring seat loose. So here you can kind of see what we did. We've got the top of the spring out of the spring pocket there, and then we ran this really long set of extensions all the way down to the bottom to get the 2 bottom bolts out. It's a 5/8 down there at the bottom of those, and they're threaded. It's a tapped hole into the top of the cast suspension components there. Really this swing arm right here. So it's actually threaded directly into that. So this made it pretty easy. Alright, so it's been about a week since we left off on our 79 Bronco project. Our regular lives got in the way. We've made a little bit of progress, but I just wanted to talk you through what we did on the front end to get the lift kit components in place before we start on the back end. So, you can see a bunch of new stuff here. So the main thing for a lift of this height is, you can see down in the C right there, this little rubber bushing piece. So this is I believe a 6 or 7 degree angle adjustment. So when you lift this with the taller springs, the angle, the steering angle will change. And so the kit that we got from Bronco Graveyard comes with the 7 degree angle adjustment so that the steering angle doesn't change. It does affect the pinion angle, but not too bad. The one major mistake that we made when we did this is we unbolted just one side, front and rear, right? So the front side is 2 bolts, or 4 bolts, sorry. Four bolts, if you can see, one right there, one on the other side, and then 2 on the bottom, right there. And what we should have done was unbolt both the left and right side, because what happened is, because this is a 7 degree angle change, when we went to try to get it in place, because the other side was still a 0 angle change, it did not want to go back together. So we ended up kind of with both sides halfway unbolted, and if you notice in the time lapse, it actually fell and dropped on us at one point. Another thing to think about when doing this is the spring and the spring pocket. At the base of the spring pocket, you can rotate this spring about 30 or 40 degrees, but the top of the spring right here has this flat bar in the middle of it, and if you don't get it lined up just right, it's really, really hard to get this little tab, this locking tab in place, which has a bolt right through the middle and a bolt right through here. So make sure you get the base rotated just right so that this is flat and square, and then jack up the bottom of the axle on this side, and it'll push it up into place and kind of flatten it out so that you can get this locking tab in place. That's the main things. We went ahead and put new shocks on it. This Bronco was actually set up for a dual shock, where you could actually put, there was a shock pocket right here that we pulled off and mount here at the bottom. We're not going to do dual shocks. We're just going to run some Pro Comp shocks in the front. So the next thing to look at is this panhard bar that mounts to the axle right here on this big stud and goes to the frame with a drop bracket right there, which I'll talk about in a second. But the main thing on this is just getting it in place horizontally. We had to use a big ratchet strap to basically pull it sideways to get the bolt in at the other end. So what that looks like is, you can see this drop bracket, and there's a bolt that goes through the frame at the top and then goes through and then across right behind the pitman arm right there. So there's a long one, and it's like an 8-inch long bolt that's got to go through the frame right there. I had to go Tractor Supply and get one of those, and then the stock bolt that goes right through there, and then that drops it down 2 inches to give your panhard bar better positioning. Did have to use a drop pitman arm as well. Had to use a pitman arm puller for that. It's just one that we had from AutoZone from a long time ago. Another problem that we did have was the shock. There's a steering stabilizer shock that bolts in right here and then up at the frame cross member. We did bend the heck out of it when we dropped and moved around this whole axle shaft trying to get everything else in position. So that's the basics of it. Now we're going to start on the rear. The rest that we did in the rear. Now, forgot to turn on the time lapse, but what we did was the blocks in the rear here, along with new U-bolts. Now, from the best I can tell, I think we're supposed to use the blocks without the factory wedge blocks in there, but I don't know that for sure. So, you know, I think next week I'll probably be calling Jeff's Bronco and figuring that out. But for now, you can see we've got the factory, or we've got the new 3-inch wedge in there with the big side towards the back, thin side towards the front, so the wedge is kind of gets smaller as it goes towards the front. There was no good instructions from the manufacturer in there, and I will also tell you a few little small tips. Once you get this mostly on, go ahead and cut these off with a cutoff wheel or something, even a torch, because it makes getting it the rest of the way on. These U-bolts that come with the Jeff's kit were so long that you could not get a deep socket on it. Also, save yourself a little bit of time and take the shocks off before you start, the shocks and the sway bar. So we were fighting the sway bar and the shocks because the sway bar, when it gets up high enough, actually hits right here. And you can see that now that the lift is actually on there, it won't even go into position. And that was really causing the whole axle to just get out of position. It does look like with this 3-inch kit too that we're gonna have to get a longer drive shaft. There's still about 1 inch or more of splines in here, but you can see that there's a bunch sticking out and that guard won't go on there anymore. So we're gonna have to get this drive shaft lengthened. I don't think that the factory wedges underneath the U-bolts or underneath the springs would affect that too much, because while it does tilt, it would tilt the pinion angle up a little bit more with the factory wedges on there. It also, the factory wedges move the axle further back away from the transmission. So I think it would be a zero sum. So yeah, definitely go ahead and remove the shocks and the sway bar before you start, and then do what we did. We loosened up, or took one side completely loose, loosened up the other side so that we could kind of pivot the side that remained, get it mostly in place. You can line it up and you can move it around by hand, and it was pretty easy from there.